In our imagination, Neanderthals are primitive, clumsy creatures, a kind of wild relative who barely copes with the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. We are used to thinking of them as losers who could not compete with the more intelligent and progressive Homo sapiens. But what if this picture painted by science is far from reality? What if Neanderthals weren't just survivors, but the most dangerous and effective predators in the history of Earth? Today, we're going to turn your perception of them upside down, and you'll see them in a completely different light. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how just one fact about Neanderthals made scientists take a new look at the entire history of humanity. The first thing that distinguished Neanderthals from their contemporaries was their incredible physical strength. Skeletal studies show that they had massive bones and more developed muscles than Homo sapiens. Their bodies were seemingly designed for survival in harsh conditions. They could withstand enormous physical exertion and endure cold temperatures that would be fatal to modern humans. This strength allowed them not only to successfully hunt large animals, but also to effectively cope with any difficulties. For example, it was easier for them to carry heavy stones for building shelters or drag animal carcasses over long distances. An analysis of their hands shows that they had a very strong grip, which allowed them to hold heavy objects and use tools that would be inconvenient for us. This strength was not just a feature, but an evolutionary advantage that helped them survive in a world where physical power was the main weapon. They were not just strong, they were resilient. Their bodies were adapted to long journeys and exhausting hunts. They could pursue their prey for hours without losing strength or endurance. This endurance, combined with physical strength, made them ideal predators that could take on any animal. They were not just hunters, but killing machines. For example, in 2018, scientists from Harvard University published a study in which they compared the bones of Neanderthals and modern humans. They concluded that Neanderthals were so strong that they could easily break the bones of any modern human. This strength was not just a feature, but an evolutionary advantage that helped them survive in a world where physical power was the main weapon. They were not just strong, they were resilient. Their bodies were adapted to long journeys and exhausting hunts. They could pursue their prey for hours without losing strength or stamina. This endurance, combined with their physical strength, made them ideal predators that could take on any animal. They were not just hunters, they were killing machines. In addition, their stocky build and low center of gravity gave them an advantage in close combat. Neanderthals often engaged in direct combat with large animals, using short, heavy spears. Studies of their skeletons show a high level of trauma, indicating a risky hunting style that required tremendous physical strength and fearlessness. Modern humans, with their more fragile anatomy, would hardly have been able to withstand such stresses. Their lack of long-range weapons and ambush tactics suggests that they relied solely on their strength and endurance. This was their main weapon, and in this they surpassed all their contemporaries. A Neanderthal could break any of our bones. Are you sure that modern progress has made us stronger, not weaker? Leave your opinion in the comments. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals were simply adapted to the cold, but this is not the case. Their bodies were literally designed to survive the Ice Age. Their noses were wider than those of modern humans, which allowed them to warm the cold air better before it entered their lungs. This was very important, as cold air could damage the lungs and cause respiratory diseases. In addition, their bodies were stockier, which reduced their surface area and helped them retain heat. They had denser bones and more developed muscles, which also helped them retain heat. Their bodies were similar to those of modern Eskimos, but they were even more adapted to the cold. For example, in 2014, scientists from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany discovered that Neanderthals had a gene that allowed them to tolerate cold better than modern humans. This gene was associated with metabolism and helped them retain heat. This was very important, as there was no constant source of heat during the Ice Age. They were forced to move constantly to keep warm, but their bodies were adapted to this. They could tolerate cold better than any other species. This was their main advantage. The ability of Neanderthals to survive in harsh climates can be explained by their unique thermoregulation system. Their stocky build and short limbs helped minimize heat loss. Compared to the more slender Homo sapiens, Neanderthals had a smaller body surface area relative to their mass, which allowed them to retain heat inside their bodies. This phenomenon, known as Bergmann's rule, was a key factor in their survival. Their powerful muscles and dense bone structure also helped them retain heat, as muscles and bones generate heat when moving and help to retain it. In addition to their external characteristics, Neanderthals possessed internal biological mechanisms that made them more resistant to cold. Research has shown that they had a high metabolism, which allowed them to produce more heat than modern humans. This high metabolism required a large amount of calories, which explains their need for large amounts of food. They were true heat engines that could maintain their temperature even in the harshest conditions. In addition, their blood had a higher concentration of red blood cells, which allowed them to carry more oxygen and use it efficiently for energy production. This was very important for their survival, as in cold conditions, the body needs more energy to maintain vital functions. This feature, combined with their high metabolism, made them ideal survivors. Have you ever wondered what else, besides physical characteristics, helped Neanderthals survive in harsh conditions? Well, the answer will surprise you. Watch the video to the end to find out what helped Neanderthals survive in harsh conditions. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals were primitive and stupid, but this is not the case. Recent studies have shown that they had developed brains and complex behavior. Their brains were even larger than those of modern humans, although they had a different structure. They knew how to make complex tools that were not just sharp stones, but were specially crafted. Their tools were very effective for hunting and butchering animals. They also knew how to use fire, but not like we do. They couldn't start it themselves, but they could keep it going for a long time. They used fire for warmth, cooking, and protection from predators. Neanderthals also had the ability to think symbolically. They knew how to draw on cave walls and make decorations from bones and shells. This suggests that they had a developed culture and could communicate using symbols. They were not just primitive creatures, but had a complex inner world. They were not just hunters, but creators. Their social organization was also very complex. They lived in small groups that were very close-knit. They helped each other and cared for the sick and weak. This suggests that they had a developed sense of empathy and compassion. They were not just wild animals, but social beings with a complex hierarchy and rules. They were not just survivors, but civilized people. Recent research has shown that Neanderthals used resin to attach spear tips, which required a high level of intellectual development and complex technological knowledge. This suggests that they were not just primitive, but engineers who could use natural materials to create complex tools. This was very important, as it allowed them to hunt large animals and survive in harsh conditions. In addition, they had the ability to plan and predict. They knew where and when animals migrated and could plan their hunts in advance. This required not only physical strength, but also intellectual superiority. They were not just hunters, but strategists who could foresee the future and make the right decisions. They were not just primitive beings, but thinking people. Neanderthals were not just strong, they were intelligent hunters. They did not rely solely on physical strength, but used complex strategies to hunt large animals. They knew how to use the features of the landscape to trap their prey. They could use caves, ravines, and other natural traps to catch mammoths, cave bears, and other large animals. They also knew how to use tools to catch their prey. They used spears with sharp points made of flint. These spears were very effective for hunting large animals. In addition, Neanderthals knew how to work as a team. They hunted in groups, which allowed them to deal with large and dangerous animals. They coordinated their actions to catch their prey. They were very effective hunters who could provide food for themselves and their families. They were not just hunters, but strategists. In 2019, scientists from the University of Colorado in Boulder published a study in which they analyzed Neanderthal bones. They found that they had very developed shoulder and arm muscles, which suggests that they used spears to hunt large animals. This was very important, as it suggests that they were not just hunters, but strategists. Contrary to popular belief, Neanderthals were not primitive and clumsy. Their hunting strategies were highly sophisticated. They did not simply chase their prey, but used stealth tactics and advanced tools for their time. For example, research has shown that they knew how to create complex traps using branches and stones to catch animals. This required not only physical strength, but also intellectual superiority. Their tools were not just sharp stones, but were specially crafted, indicating a high level of skill. They knew how to use resin to attach spearheads, which required complex technological knowledge. This was very important, as it allowed them to hunt large animals and survive in harsh conditions. In addition, Neanderthals had the ability to plan and predict. They knew where and when animals migrated and could plan their hunts in advance. This required not only physical strength, but also intellectual superiority. They were not just hunters, but strategists who could foresee the future and make the right decisions. They were not just primitive creatures, but thinking people. If Neanderthals had discovered social media, they would have definitely started a hunting without filters challenge. But could they have adapted to our world as well as they did to theirs? Watch this video to find out just how incredible their ability to adapt was. Neanderthals weren't just adapted to the cold, they were universal survivors. They could survive in a wide variety of environments, from cold steppes to warm forests. They knew how to use different resources for survival, from large animals to fish and plants. They were very flexible and could adapt to any situation. Their ability to adapt was one of the main reasons for their survival. They were not tied to one place or one type of food. They could move from place to place to find food and water. They were not just survivors, they were versatile. Their adaptability was evident not only in their physiology, but also in their behavior. Neanderthals were able to adapt to the climate changes that occurred during their existence. They could change their hunting strategies depending on what animals were available. For example, during periods of warming, they hunted deer and wild boar, and during periods of cooling, they hunted mammoths and woolly rhinos. This flexibility was very important for their survival, as it allowed them to find food in all conditions. They were not just hunters, but strategists who could anticipate changes in the environment and make the right decisions. They were not tied to one place, which allowed them to avoid competition with other species and find new sources of food. They knew how to use different resources to survive. For example, during periods when meat was scarce, they could feed on fish and plants. This was very important, as it allowed them to survive periods of famine. They were not just survivors, but versatile creatures that could find food in any conditions. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals died out due to competition with Homo sapiens. But this is not the case. Recent studies have shown that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side for thousands of years. They did not just live side by side, they interbred with each other. We still carry Neanderthal genes within us. This suggests that they were not strangers, but part of our history. So why did they die out? There are many theories: climate change, disease, lack of food, but none of them explain why they died out. Perhaps they did not die out, but simply assimilated with Homo sapiens. They mixed with us, and their genes live on in us to this day. This suggests that they were not failures, but part of our history. The latest data suggests that the reason for the disappearance of Neanderthals may have been much more complicated. One theory suggests that they did not die out, but were absorbed by intelligent humans. Their small, scattered groups simply could not withstand the influx of more numerous and organized groups of Homo sapiens, who were already actively settling in European territories at that time. Neanderthals may not have lost the struggle for survival, but simply dissolved into a larger population. There is also a theory that Neanderthals were more vulnerable to sudden climate change. Despite their adaptation to the cold, they may not have been able to adapt to the unstable climatic conditions characterized by a series of sudden warming and cooling periods. Their hunting strategies, which were focused on large game, proved ineffective when animal herds began to migrate or die out. At the same time, Homo sapiens, thanks to a more varied diet and a wide range of technologies, proved to be more flexible and resilient. If Neanderthals died out, why do we still carry their genes? Maybe they just ran away from their annoying relatives? Keep watching this video to find out what really connects Neanderthals and modern humans. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals and modern humans were enemies, but this is not the case. Recent research has shown that they did not just live side by side, they cooperated. They exchanged knowledge, technology, and may even have hunted together. This suggests that they were not enemies but partners. Their cooperation was very important because it helped them survive in harsh conditions. Homo sapiens were smarter, while Neanderthals were stronger. They complemented each other. Homo sapiens could create more complex tools, while Neanderthals could use them more effectively. This was a very important cooperation that helped them survive. Their interaction went beyond simple coexistence. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens probably exchanged not only genes, but also cultural achievements. Archaeological finds indicate that they had similar technologies for making stone tools, which suggests the transfer of skills. For example, some tools found at Neanderthal sites had elements characteristic of Homo sapiens technology, and vice versa. It was a kind of mutually beneficial partnership, where each species contributed to the common cause of survival. Neanderthals may have passed on knowledge about how to survive in cold conditions, animal migration routes, and where to find food. Homo sapiens, in turn, may have shared their skills in creating more complex tools and symbolic thinking. This was not just cooperation, but a symbiosis that helped both species survive in harsh conditions. They were not enemies, but partners who could learn from each other. We are used to thinking that Neanderthals were primitive and had no culture, but this is not the case. Recent research has shown that they had a developed culture and art. They knew how to paint on cave walls and make decorations from bones and shells. This suggests that they had a developed sense of beauty and could communicate using symbols. Their art was not just decoration, but a means of communication. They used it to pass on knowledge, stories, and traditions. They were not just hunters, but creators with a complex inner world. Neanderthals not only created tools for survival, but also engaged in what is considered to be the preserve of intelligent humans, symbolic self-expression. This is evidenced by finds in the form of necklaces made from eagle claws, drilled animal teeth, and shells found at Neanderthal sites. These items had no practical use and were used as decorations, indicating that Neanderthals had an aesthetic sense and a need for self-identification. Moreover, some researchers suggest that Neanderthals used red pigments, such as ochre, to paint designs on their bodies or on cave walls. This suggests that they had a developed sense of symbolism and could use colors to convey ideas and emotions. These findings are turning our understanding of Neanderthals upside down and showing that they were not just survivors, but thinking people with a complex inner world. We still carry Neanderthal genes within us. These genes were very important to our ancestors, as they helped them survive in harsh conditions. But today, these genes can be the cause of our diseases. For example, some genes that we inherited from Neanderthals may be the cause of our allergies, diabetes, and other diseases. This suggests that our history with Neanderthals is not over, but continues. Neanderthal genes inherited by modern humans have played an important role in adapting to new environmental conditions. For example, they helped our ancestors cope better with unknown viruses and bacteria they encountered when they left Africa. These genes strengthened the immune system, allowing it to fight new pathogens more quickly and effectively. Thus, what was an evolutionary advantage thousands of years ago, today with advanced medicine and hygiene, can cause autoimmune diseases when the immune system overreacts to harmless stimuli. For example, Neanderthal genes associated with the immune response may be responsible for allergies and asthma, which are the result of the body's excessive reaction to external factors. This suggests that our history with Neanderthals is not over, but continues to influence our health. Neanderthals were not just primitive creatures, but complex, intelligent, and strong people. They were not just survivors, but true predators who could take on any animal. They were not just losers, but part of our history. We must remember them, as they were our ancestors who helped us survive in harsh conditions. Modern research has completely overturned our understanding of Neanderthals. They were not simply a dead end of evolution, but a parallel civilization with its own culture, technology, and unique view of the world. We didn't just push them out, we joined forces with them. Their genes, which still live on in us, are proof of our shared history. We must stop viewing Neanderthals as primitive beings and see them as our equals. They were our ancestors who helped us survive in harsh conditions. They were the ones who paved the way for our species. Their history is part of our history, and we must remember them in order to understand who we are. Well, we have learned that Neanderthals were not just survivors, but were the most dangerous and effective predators in the history of Earth. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are many other facts that we did not have time to discuss. For example, how they built their shelters, how they communicated with each other, and how they lived. What else do you think we can discuss about Neanderthals? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our new videos.